Hi, everybody who's joined our webinar today. We're so happy to have you. This is June Bauer. I'm speaking to you from Grid Dynamics, who's sponsoring this webinar. Our webinar is about giving your customer experience an edge and talking about the future of edge platforms. We're so delighted to have you join us to spend time with us today. And I'm really pleased to say that we have some amazing panelists with us today that are going to help us understand the whole, shall we say, fog around the edge experience. So really happy about our panelists, really happy to have you join. And I wanted to just let you know quickly what our agenda looks like for today. My name is June Bauer. I'm going to be hosting this webinar, and we're going to start by introducing our amazing panel who has some very interesting things to share with us today. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with some questions to our panelists that hopefully will illuminate this whole topic for us. And finally, we're going to have a Q&A, and that's where we invite you to participate. If you have questions during the presentation today, we really encourage you to use your Q&A that you'll find on your Zoom bar, typically at the bottom of your screen. If you press on Q&A and put a question in, we'll monitor it, and we'll hopefully be able to get to many of your questions towards the end of our webinar today. So encourage you to type questions in at any time, but we'll probably take most of them towards the end of the webinar. Again, really excited to have you all join. I want to take a few minutes just to introduce our amazing panel. So I am going to do this the best way possible, which is to let our panelists actually introduce themselves. I want to start with Tom. So Tom, do you want to introduce yourself to the wonderful group we have here online today?
Hi, Tom Barnett with Lumen Technologies. You probably knew us as CenturyLink at some time. And believe it or not, we still have a division called CenturyLink under the Lumen Technologies group. The big reason we rebranded is because of Edge and because of a different focus for the corporation itself. We're focused more on technology solutions and opportunities we can do with that, but more importantly, our commitment to Edge and the Edge programs that come with it and what we can do with that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And Brad, how about you?
All right, thank you. Brad Corian with Intel Corporation, actually part of what we call our Internet of Things group. And one of our big pushes is to understand how we can deploy compute and technology, sensing and analytics at the edge. My team and our focus is in community building, open source projects, investing in all of the technologies that are going to enable this transformation and make deployable the capabilities of edge computing.
Sounds like a great job. I'm envious. And Romeo, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Of course, Jim, thank you very much. Hi, I'm Romeo Sikihor, and I'm the regional CIO for Cemex USA. Cemex is one of the largest building materials company in the world, and we operate in 50 countries around the globe. Glad to be here.
Boy, that's a big global operation you've got there. That's very impressive. And our final panelist is Max. Max, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, John. My name is Max Martinov. I am CTO of Grid Dynamics. I'm responsible for our solution development. And one of our latest solutions that we are bringing to the market at Grid Dynamics is to help companies accelerate their movement to the edge and implement new customer experience and platforms at edge.
All right. I love it. You can see we've got a really well-rounded panel, but also 4 people with amazing experience in computing and in edge technology. So I'm excited to learn from you all today. But before we do that, I want to just get a show of hands. If you see on the webinar that you can raise your hand, I just want to ask you guys to raise your hand. Does everybody see that, I hope? Raise your hand. If you can't figure out how to do that, just chat me a message. But I want to hear, what is the primary benefit driving your company's interest right now in edge computing? I put down a few of these. I'm going to just call one out and let's see, how many of you, if you want to raise your hand, think that creating a better user experience is your first choice? Just go ahead and raise your hand or chat to me. And maybe if you just want to go into the chat, it might be more interesting for us to all hear. Write down of these ones I wrote down, or if I didn't hit the one that you're interested in, please chat something else to us. Okay. Hopefully you all got a chance to think about that or chat. I'd love it if you were willing to chat so we know a little bit better, and that way we can help tailor our presentation to you. I was also interested in what your top challenge is in implementing a complete edge platform. And, you may be wondering how to get started or how to train your team, how to manage all the data that you're getting, or maybe consolidate your new data with the data that you already have, build an architecture that's going to scale, potentially create a single powerful user experience, or how do you get help to build this out? Potentially budget may be your challenge, or maybe creating a competitive advantage. Any thoughts on that? Anybody want to share what they're trying to do? I see a few people. Don't be shy. If you want to share, I think we'll do a better job for you, but if you're not comfortable, that's no problem as well. So we've got a few user experience and also architectural questions. I think these are great. Okay. Well, thanks. And if there's something you want us to focus on you're not hearing during the webinar, make sure to put a question into the question box or chat us something. So I want to start by telling you a story. About 7 years ago, I got my first electric vehicle, and it was really exciting. And I loved it. Because what I found out was not only was it electric, but like the car was fully connected, and I could stream music and podcasts, and I could use the internet, and I was automatically connected to GPS. It was just like, the electric part was cool, but the user experience of being in the car and having all this connectivity was even more amazing. And, on one of the first days I was driving the car down the road, and all of a sudden, whomp, I hit a big pothole. And I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. I just got a new car and I'm just driving in potholes. This is terrible. It's terrible on the wear and tear for the car. And then something dawned on me, and I thought, gee, with all these connected vehicles, why couldn't the vehicles who came before me and went through that same pothole have sent some sort of a message back to the mothership and said, hey, there's a pothole here, and when people are approaching it, you should warn them about it, right? So that I would have known not to go right over that pothole and to go around it. So frustrating, but also a great case for edge computing. That is a great opportunity for a company that has connected cars to be able to figure that out and offer that value by collecting data from cars, analyzing the data, and then turning it into a usable piece of information back to the cars. So I think it goes to show that there are just thousands of use cases for edge computing as we're seeing more and more connected devices, becoming essentially, computers. Everything we do today, from our phones to machines on a factory floor to, the retail experience, everything is becoming connected. And it's really a beautiful vision to connect all these things for companies. But I think the reality is that, as the people who need to implement that vision, our paths in the future may be filled with many potholes. It may not be as easy as we think it's going to be. So today, what I thought we could do is to help you by letting you know about what are some of the potholes in building this platform of the future, this edge platform of the future, and also what are some of the big opportunities to do that so that you can effectively build out your edge platform that's going to serve you today and into the future. So let's get started. I've got some great questions for our panelists that I'm going to want to ask them, and you may have some of your own, so feel free to chime in. Let's get started with our conversation, and I have a first question, and Romeo, I'm going to throw this one to you, which is, from the end user point of view, what do you see as the future of the user experience, say 5 years from now?
Thank you, June. I hope and I wish I have a crystal ball, but I don't, right? But I think in 5 years, I think of single touch, right? Push rather than pull technologies will become mainstream. So let me give you some examples. In the CRM space, customers will just need to swipe right to reorder or pay. Something that is already happening right now. but I think this will be our default way of buying in the future. So, all of this and payment processing will also be empowered using technologies like blockchain in the SCM or supply chain management space. And I think IoT devices will start, prompting us or the consumers to automatically trigger the supply chain sourcing, and look for that cheapest option with the fastest delivery time and from the most reputable supplier. So I think those are becoming more and more mainstream, right? But not a lot of enterprises or companies are adapting that. In our case, particularly in the manufacturing industry, one of the main challenges that we have is maintenance. So to keep the machine running all the time, most of the time, right? But we are not ready for that. So I think the older technologies that we have are preventing us to get there. But in the future, I see at least in the next 5 years, IoT, industrial IoT is going mainstream, so that machines will actually tell the maintenance team or maintenance team, to fix them or their components because they are not feeling well. So I think that those type of interaction between human to human, human to machine interactions or machine to machine interactions will be a main thing.
Oh, I love that. I love the idea of, every machine is now starting to be a source of data. And if you can put that data to use, it's going to be really amazing. That's fantastic. Tom, from your perspective, what do you see that future vision looking like?
So there's several different levels to this, but to keep it short, we're talking consumer here first, so I'll talk about that. So from my point of view, looking at, from a strategic innovation that I do, AR, VR is going to be huge. And without edge and the low latency that edge products give you and the ability to distribute computing where you need it, to distribute memory, storage, those types of things on the fly where you need it was one of the functions of an edge. That's not going to be possible. So using those things, for instance, from logistics, you go to a car parts place now and you look up your car parts and you see a picture and you pick it and you go, oh, that's what I want. Well, you can just put on your HoloLenses, walk outside, look at your car. It recognizes your car and says you're driving a BMW, whatever, and you say tire, and it tells you what tire, front tire, and it picks the front tire and tells you here's the choices, and they show up in front of you, and you can do those types of things. I think also DoD manufacturing are going to do a lot of those things also. That intelligence will be a persona that follows you because the edge will allow you to do that. That persona will go wherever you go. So you're here in the US, you go over to Europe, you connect up over there. Now the edge platform says phone's home and says, hey, Tom's over here in France right now. We need to know all his data so we can do him a better job. But when he's looking and walking down the street and asking me questions, I can do things for him. So that type of consumer intelligence, customization, those are the things that Edge promises for you in that area.
I love that vision. And I especially love the part about the car tire, because I think I'm going to need that after having driven through a few potholes. So I appreciate that one. Thank you. And Brad, from your perspective, share with us your vision.
Before I share the vision, I want to touch on the edge computing in the car that you opened with, June. I think most people forget that the average modern automobile is generating, what's the statistic? I think it's around 4 terabytes of data a day of daily driving. But of course, we're not uploading all of that data back to the mothership, as you said. So that is, by definition, one of the most popular edge computers we have, because we generate that data and we process that data as part of driving, running suspension, running fuel economy, doing all of that work that an automobile has to do. That is quintessentially the definition of using data, analyzing data, using data where the data is generated, in this case, in the automobile, from the automobile. So that's how I open, a conversation around edge computing and analysis right where the data is being generated. But to speak to the end user experience, we see this going into probably one of two paths, and both are going to require edge computing. You're either going for hyper convenient, right? We want 2-hour shipping. So taking Tom's example of the auto parts store, once you choose that tire, I don't want to wait for it, right? How are you going to get that tire to me as quickly as possible? right? So this is going to be an entire, mind shift change for the average consumer experience. Okay, I'm going to compete by being as convenient as possible. And the other side is how immersive can I be? Think Disneyland. The reason people love to go to theme parks is because every aspect of their visit is overwhelming, hopefully positively, with characters and themes and rides and thrills. And if we water that down a little bit, think of going to the shopping mall. You're not going because it's convenient per se. It might be convenient that there's multiple brands to choose from, but you're going because it's an experience, a little entertainment, be with friends. And retailers, as an example, I think are going to have to decide, are they there to provide convenience and compete with the hyper convenient folks, or are they there to help you provide a fun experience that you actually welcome and want to go back and visit? And both convenience and rich depth of experience requires all sorts of analysis, whether you have to figure out where your parts are, how to get your parts out, where the customer is, how to get it to the customer, or whether it's about understanding what section of their journey they're on and how best to give them offers or information or entertainment at that particular moment. Either case, lots of analytics.
Yeah, lots of data and lots of analytics, both. I mean, just the comment you made about the car, it's like almost overwhelming. So things are going to have to change. And I guess that brings me to my next question. And Max, I'm going to throw this one to you, but what do you think are going to be the technology challenges to getting to some of these incredible ideas that you guys have about what the future will look like?
But before I answer that, I actually want to clarify a little bit, because the topic of our today's discussion is edge, right? But edge itself might be like a little bit of an overloaded term. And it might span the concepts of fog computing as well, when you do not necessarily have like these edge devices, but you have thousands of locations where you want kind of more computing capacity and host your platforms. But it also covers the edge itself, with potentially even kind of more devices and more connected cars and other things that will become of this part of the Internet of Things. So having said that, I want to talk about two major, I would say, challenges from my perspective. Today, all of the majority of the developers know about the cloud very well. And cloud right now provides you with a very developer-friendly interface, all the CI/CD capabilities, DevOps, platforms, technology stack, and so on and so forth. Now, when we go to the fog or to the edge, it is still not as development friendly, and it is still not as operations friendly. And one of the challenges is just having this unified platform that ideally you can use across the cloud, fog, and edge to deploy your applications in the same way, in a seamless way. And the second is think about the data that many people touched upon already in this discussion. When we were in the era of data centers, we had relational databases, and we had a database maybe deployed on a couple of servers with a replication between them. When we went to the cloud, now the databases, NoSQL databases, might be deployed on tens of the servers. But now when we go to the edge, you need to have data in thousands of locations, or maybe in tens of or hundreds of thousands of devices. And it's good if it's just analytics, because you just need to collect the data from the devices and from your locations and send it to the mothership. But you also need to distribute the data back, configuration data, or think about a retail use case when you have a pricing and promotions engine that you are running in a centralized locations, and your merchandising team is configuring all the prices and promotions across the stores, but you then need to distribute this data to the respective stores. And the replication here is not even as trivial as you want to have all the data everywhere. You actually want to figure out that, like, that in this particular store, you want to have a pricing data that is relevant only to the store, and so on and so forth. So this, I would say, some of the major ones.
Hey, I would agree with you, Max, and you're making my head hurt, because these are going to be huge challenges that we're going to have to figure out how to overcome. And we're going to talk about that. Don't leave our webinar yet. We're not going to leave you hanging. But I want to just get one more perspective on what some of the challenges are. And so, Brad, I'm going to ask you if you might have some ideas on that.
Yeah, everything Max said, let's pile on some of the challenges on top of what Max said. A lot of times our current businesses are run by our vendors, right? So I can think of one retailer who has 0 developers on their IT team, but they rely on close working relationships with their vendors. So if you imagine they have 15, 20, 30 vendors providing different systems, and you want to create a new experience at the edge, you want to enable curbside pickup where you have to know within 30 seconds if you have availability of a product to deliver to someone at the curb. You have to have great confidence both in the sensing and systems, knowledge of your inventory, and that you can work quickly with those vendors or integrate and extract data from existing applications, let alone all the new applications you might have to create. So for me, I think that one of the biggest challenges technologically is the integration. It might sound boring, but I think there's actually a steep cliff of working across a broad set of applications, a broad set of devices, and a broad set of data formats to be able to pull that data in and make actionable decisions when you need them at the pace of innovation that you're trying to achieve.
Okay, thank you for piling on. That was actually good. And now I am feeling somewhat overwhelmed. So I think I need some help from Tom. Tom, I'm going to ask you, do you see a place for an edge platform to eliminate and help with some of these challenges? I mean, how do you look at it?
I mean, one of the big things we always talk about edge is latency and low latency. So for the most part, you're looking at 5 milliseconds or less, and typically you deal with 50 milliseconds or better out on the internet. So that's one of the big things that comes out of it. So you've got video issues that work much faster. But on top of that, depending on how the interfaces are done and how we do that locally, there's other technologies that make this. So basically, the central office becomes the mainframe of today, right? That's what we're doing. So we're pushing all this power. You don't need to have it localized. You can, as in automobiles, like Intel's mentioned there. You can also have it localized in 5G radio heads, right? So you can have it right there on the site and do instant turnaround so that traffic gets handled, processed, and sent back to you almost instantly when you're trying to do things. An example of that is we just finished a B-52 virtual trainer for Global Strike Command here at Barksdale Air Force Base. And we're using an edge solution for that. Instead of the traditional large link simulators that you've seen all over in buildings manned by 10 people, we're using a Tesla suit and VR glasses to train B-52 pilots on how to fly the aircraft and so forth, and give them biofeedback, give them all types of things. Without edge, that's not going to work at the speed it needs to work at. So you're going to be able to do those types of things. Smart materials that are going into buildings. You're actually going to have intelligence built into your buildings and the materials and so forth. I know Romeo probably can talk about that better than me, but there are thoughts on how that's going to happen and be those types of things that will work and react. So the entire area becomes a IoT device, not just pieces of it, not things we hang on the wall, but the entire ecosystem, the entire environment turns into an IoT of things that gets large. So handling that much data and taking care of it is a big part of what Edge is going to do for you. Those are some just big things, I think.
Well, those are great. And those are fantastic examples. And I want a field trip to see that trainer for the B-52s. That sounds so amazing and cool. I would just love to see.
It's fun. I can't tell you how many times I've crashed a B-52 lately. So.
I crashed one too. That sounds like a lot of fun. All right. Well, thanks for sharing those. So I think those are great. Romeo, now from your perspective and being in the manufacturing world, share with us how you think Edge could help in that world and resolve some of these problems.
I'll tell you if you let me join the field trip with Tom on that. But I totally
agree with Tom. Talk to Tom. We got to be nice to Tom on this webinar. That's our goal.
So I would agree with Tom, first of all, right? I think everything he said is near and dear to my heart. Now, again, we are a user of this technology. We are trying to revolutionize a Flintstones industry, right? Rock grinding is our thing, and of course, building automation and industrial IoT platform definitely is something that we are heavily investing on. So again, in the manufacturing space, industrial IoT platforms are expected to improve operational efficiency by first capitalizing on analytics and the AI based tool sets that are available at our disposal right now. And having edge platforms will definitely speed up the processing and improve the data gathering of the shop floor data sets, offloading heavy transmission and central processing, like what Tom said. This will make transaction processing and analytics more lightweight, bite-sized, and easier to digest.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. That is super helpful. I'm sorry, I'm moving the slide ahead, just getting too excited here. So I would like to, I know there's companies out there that are actually kind of leading in building edge platforms. I'd like to just take a minute and ask a couple of you to share what they're actually doing, share with us some examples, and maybe Max, I can start with you on that one.
Sure. And when it comes to technologies, I think are crucial for the edge deployment and one of the priorities for edge deployment, I would like to focus on three specific categories of these technologies. The first one is the platform itself. And to me, the platform is essentially somewhere that you can deploy these capabilities, somewhere, something that can host your applications, be it data gathering or analytics or machine learning or just applications. And we see that Kubernetes is slowly kind of getting from the just cloud deployment space into the edge space as well. And I really hope that ultimately we will become standardized on Kubernetes across the board. That will help us to build applications in a more kind of unified way across the cloud and the edge. The second thing I want to talk about is the databases, because again, data when it comes to edge is a problem, and it's not just analytics, but again, managing application data. It's hard to point out a specific technology that has already solved this problem. I would say that we are in the early days. I can point out companies like Macrometa that, for example, create a database that is specifically geared towards multi-location deployment and is designed to be deployed in hundreds or thousands of locations and replicate the data with very interesting patterns and also host some of the applications as a part of it. The third one is AI, and obviously one of the AI capabilities that are becoming very popular for the edge deployment is computer vision, image analytics, video analytics, and we see that in connected cars, we see that in retail, we see that pretty much everywhere. Generally speaking, AI platforms, which again, many of them are based on Kubernetes and Kubeflow, and just deploying AI capabilities on top.
That's fantastic. And are there any examples you can share with us of companies that are doing any of this? And if I put you on the spot, feel free to say no. But
oh no, a good example of, for example, a company that is deploying Kubernetes across the board is Chick-fil-A. They went with their public story around their success story around deploying Kubernetes in all of their stores and then hosting applications in a unified way there. And I think that's a great example of how platforms like Kubernetes can become a new standard and finally marry this the edge deployment and cloud deployment, and help with innovation at the edge, because like Tom and Romeo said before, innovation at the edge is important, and we ultimately want to create more applications, we want to create more customer experience, and we want to do it faster.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And Brad, can I ask you, do you look at certain companies and go, they're doing a great job of leading this edge platform march?
Yeah, so I don't just say the same things that Max did, because I think what he said is absolutely true. Another example to look at beyond Chick-fil-A is, for example, Target. They've discussed publicly their Target application platform and they've basically said technology is the basis of their innovation. It's not just a cost of doing business. And they have systematically invested in building a platform that runs Target. And an application developer doesn't have to write an application for a cloud or for an edge device or for a telco edge. They write an application and someone else helps decide where you deploy it. And so they built a fluid platform across their compute spectrum where they can just decide where's the best place to run an application. It's a small value proposition that I exposed in that statement, though. But what the thing I want people to hear is, cloud development technologies, as mentioned earlier, we have so many developers that are graduating with this strength and this skill set. There's no reason to invent something new for the edge. And we don't necessarily want to maintain multiple kinds of environments across an organization. So if you can find a way in your organization to use the same tools, technologies, processes, that's when it becomes a platform, right? An edge platform that you can write one application and choose where to deploy it with your vendors, across different hosting environments, at your edge, at your, connectivity provider edge, wherever that might be. I think that's an exciting value in investing in the edge.
Yeah, so I think your point is great, which is that if you really want to have your infrastructure be able to scale, that you've got to figure out how you build not individual solutions, but rather a platform that works across all the pieces. I think that's really smart. I also love the Target story because I think a lot of you've heard the story of Target, but early on they were able to use data about customers so incredibly effectively that they could figure out which of their customers were pregnant. And then they started marketing to those customers, selling them all sorts of things for their, coming new baby. And it actually backfired on them because people felt very creepy about it. It's like, how did you know I'm pregnant? I didn't share that very personal information with you. There are certain people in my family who don't know yet Target knows. But I think there is a real interest on the part of, consumers and companies to better know each other. And of course, you have to be careful when you're playing with fire, but I do think ultimately it is an edge platform that is going to be able to solve these problems for us. So I think that is pretty exciting in terms of getting to the future. Okay, so let's turn to data. We've talked a lot about data today, kind of in and around it, but I want to focus head on with data because I think we all realize how much data is going to be collected, is being collected. And I'm wondering, and Romeo, I'm going to toss this to you, but what do you think are going to be the challenges, not only in collecting data, but in making the data useful to your company?
First of all, let me chime in on the Target story since you guys already started it. So to continue with that story, actually what happened one day, right? And so a teenager, she got pregnant, unfortunately. And she actually received, gift cards from Target, because she was browsing, items for babies, etc. So she actually received a gift card from Target saying, "Hey, congratulations, you're looking for this, so we are giving you discounts and this and that." So that's when too much data is dangerous, right? And that is a challenge by itself on the perspective, we're treading on dangerous ground between privacy and security, right? So I think that's one important challenge that we need to be aware of. The second one, again, I think most companies like us is that there are so many data sets out there, but there's so little time and very few data analysts to make sense out of those data, right? In our case, for example, we collect tons of data, sensing information from temperature, rotations, vibrations, resonance, visual information, and a whole gamut of data sets. No? But transmitting them, to their final destination to be processed and consumed by the final decision makers is still a major setback. This, I believe, can be addressed using edge platforms partially, but not entirely. But at least that data gathering part, definitely. Edge platforms will definitely help. No, again, the problem of the analysis and very few data analysts who can actually process those will still remain there.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I love your comments. Thank you for giving more color to the target story as well. So, Tom, I want to turn to you and ask you. You know, with the examples you've given, it's pretty clear there's going to be a lot of data. What's your take on that?
The whole purpose of IoT and everything is to make this plethora of information available. We can do all kinds of things with it. We can turn it into machine learning, AI, those types of things are going to be great. But that data is going to come at us fast and furious. So the challenges to me are how we sort that. How do we make use of it? How do we identify it and what to do with it to start with immediately? So one of the projects we're doing is called Project Searchlight. We're working out at USC and working with DARPA on this. So data comes in and there's thresholds of classification. So the first one it looks at and it says, what is this data in general? You know, oh, it's HTTPS. Is it data I even care about, right? Or is it data that's compromised? So maybe I need to take a little better look at this. Maybe it's got some problems with it. And then you go through these various series of that. And it has to do that, you know, in milliseconds and less to get that data and get the value out of it. Also, that data is coming at us so fast is how do we do this with software-defined networks? So radios are software-defined. Every device is software-defined and we can create it. So the Google cars were mentioned earlier. One of the things we've been looking at is how do we transmit data from self-driving cars and so forth as they're going down the road, download that info rather than them having to come to a station and unload it and those types of things. How can we use this data then to turn it into actionable items? For instance, we monitor the data, and this is part of what we call our polymorphic networking capabilities, is we're monitoring data coming in. We see this sense of IoT. So we see an accelerometer, we see the velocity, we see a temperature and we go, oh, that's a pump. We know what that is. So our solution automatically creates the machine learning for it, locks it up to the machine, trains it for 200 seconds, then says, I got it, and then reports itself back to the system and says, we got a pump online now in Western Texas, and it's sending this data, and then starts sending data to the data lake, all doing this as an object. So you're just not an IoT device hooked to the network. The pump just became a node on the network. So that's the level that I think Edge will do for us and make those data things, and the nodes themselves will become part of the network.
I love that. I do, because I mean, it seems like we're getting to smaller and smaller pieces are now being networked, which is gonna, and have intelligence, which ultimately is going to lead to much better solutions. But I loved your combining the thought of, you know, data and IT. In order to get to something that's really usable, you need to combine data and AI together. And that combination of data and AI is a killer combination. But I also like your point about setting priorities. And I think these are all things that are super illuminating and helpful for us to think of as we're thinking about how to make the best use of data. So I want to turn back to potholes for a minute. And I want to ask you guys about, have you seen people try to implement edge technology and make mistakes? Or just as you think about it, are there things that would concern you that our audience needs to think about as they begin to really push their edge technology? So, you know, what are those potential mistakes or pitfalls out there? Max, let me start with you on this one.
Sure. And in this case, I would lead not with technology, but I would lead with customer experience. And I would say that like one of the major pitfalls would be not thinking about customer experience or not analyzing that enough. Because there is a story from Walmart. They did an experiment for 3 years. They implemented and unleashed a bunch of robots to roam their stores on the aisles to check the inventory levels and kind of do all that stuff. But ultimately, they canceled it for a number of reasons. It turned out that it's not that efficient, and they were also freaking out customers. Because imagine that you are going to Walmart, and then who meets you there is a robot who is kind of walking down the store. And it's not a small robot, it's like 6 foot something device. So it might be just challenging for customers to understand that and to accept that. It's an edge use case. Was it good? Who knows? Maybe in the future we will all see robots in the stores, but maybe not right now. And like, for example, maybe right now, in order to perform a similar task, you use a combination of kind of human beings and maybe a better solution would be just to have a bunch of cameras on the floor. Maybe they will be less precise, but at least they will not freak out the customers as much.
Okay, thank you for my dose of humor this morning. I was laughing so hard. It's a good thing I was on mute, but it's a very funny vision. I do know right now, just as a side note, that Walmart now is testing some robots again, but this time they are robots that make smoothies in the store, and they don't walk around. They're just in a one unit, and they make smoothies, and so there's no human touch to it, which is a really great product during a global pandemic. So, perhaps they'll be more successful with this more specific solution this time. But yeah, super interesting. Tom, how about you? Have you seen, pitfalls or things that we should be concerned about as we go to implement an edge platform?
Yeah. But one real quick thing, I saw a robot, and it takes oranges, and these oranges are all over it. It takes the oranges in, it makes orange juice out of them, but it takes the peelings from the oranges and makes cups out of them at the same time. So you get your orange juice in a cup made out of orange peels. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen.
Where can we get this?
It was in France, but it was really cool.
Oh,
but
I
it's a one of a kind. So it just caught my idea. And I went, I got to tell you about that. You got to look that up. It's out there on the web. You got to see it. So data challenges, the pitfalls. I'm sorry. So I guess there's 3 critical items for me, being the guy that, we make the pipes and everything, and we also do all the technologies that go with it, but you got to do some basics. So, a software-defined network, I guess, is key to it. It's a hybrid of wired and wireless technologies. It has endpoints and it connects users to the right compute services. Connecting to the right services is important. And also, can you distribute those services and so forth where you need to? The other one is a hybrid cloud diversity. We talk about edge, and we kind of hinted on this in some areas, but the venue of cloud is there's embedded in the network, there's edge locations, and there's resident at the premises. And then there's even metro locations and so forth. And then there's a traditional cloud way out there. And what do we use those things for, right? Some processes can happen in a metro area, others can happen otherwise. So you want to think through what you're trying to do. Do I have a web page that I'm trying to produce across the world and give the same experience in 14 languages? Using a common platform. Okay, that's a different view than I'm trying to park cars and find parking spaces for people. Okay, different set of rules. Managed orchestration, I think, is a big part of if you don't get that right and you don't have the right support for that, how do you deploy apps and services? How do you execute them in the right venue, on the right network, and how do you get the right secure operational controls to go with them? Those are the big 3. And then you got to wrap this thing in security. And you got to stop all those other bad problems that are out there. So you've got to look through those things in that manner. So those are just kind of the big things you want to do.
Yeah, and a very interesting and really helpful answer. And it's making me think, like, the next time we all meet and talk about this, we need to have at least a day, because there are so many interesting things you all are saying that I'd love to delve more deeply in, and I know our audience would as well. But since we're running short on time here, I'm going to ask you guys one more question. And I'm really interested in, for those people who are on this call and are kind of thinking, how do I get started? What are the things I need to think about? Should I be, training my team, hiring new people? Should I be asking for outside resources? How should I be getting the budget or thinking about the budget for this? There's so many things that might be on their minds, but it's really about pragmatically, what are the things you need to think about to really get started building out your edge platform? And maybe, 3 pieces of advice from each of you for our listeners would be really helpful. And maybe, Romeo, I can start with you.
Sure, June. Again, to my mind, it's a question of in-source versus outsource, right? So I think it will definitely be a hybrid mode for me, right? So let me tell you why. First, usually in-house subject matter experts, they have better understanding of the processes and the peculiarities of your business, right? They have what I call the tribal knowledge, which an external subject matter expert may not necessarily have. But on the other hand, outsourced SMEs, right, bring different perspective on things new capabilities, and new solutions to address the problem. So to me, I believe it must be a combination or a hybrid of both in-source and outsourced experts working together to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I also think when you look at people who come from the outside, they've done this not exactly to what your company needs, but they've been through it a few times and they know where those potholes are. They may not know everything about your organization, but they're going to know the vast majority of them. So I think your point is very well taken. Brad, how about you?
One of the things I think that concerns me about getting started is kind of the chicken and egg. Do you build a modern cloud native platform for your edge and wait for the use case? Or do you run with your use case and just deploy it and see if you can learn from it and convince yourself that it was the right thing to do and your organization invests in it? So I think that trade-off needs to be understood as shortcuts to avoid. Right? We already have on-premises compute. That's not new. We've had it for decades. What we're trying to change, though, is how you deploy and how you support and how you use that investment for future growth to solve the next problem, which we're not even thinking about yet. So that's one, understand what problem you're solving and how you're getting ready for the future, for the unknown problems. And then I think the other that I would end with, along those lines, I think Max will probably speak about the team challenges, right, of the old mentality of keep everything running versus a new mentality of experiment and be agile and be nimble. So that'd be my number two. The number three is just build off of what Tom said earlier. And a software-defined everything, networking, software-defined storage, software-defined compute. We need to embrace that and utilize it fully. So go for this mentality called infrastructure as code, where not just your applications are written as code and controlled by process, but your infrastructure itself is recorded as code and is maintained by that same agile process so that you can revision it and with a new version, push it out to your edges and see that infrastructure, the networking, the storage, and the resource allocation, materialize based on that new deployment. I think that's going to be a critical mentality for people to absorb to really get some of the benefit out of this new wave of edge computing.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And really, I think what you're encouraging us to do is to think differently about our architecture based on the problem we're trying to solve, which I really love. I think that's great advice. Tom, how about you? What are your three kind of pieces of advice here?
Well, it's a difficult question for everybody. Everybody has such a nuance to what they're doing and where they're at in life. From a company like Lumen here, we have partners like Intel and others that we have all kinds of help, right? So we do a lot of development with these partners, and I have a lot of startups I bring in also under our what we call the Pelican Innovation Partnership down here in Louisiana. So we do a lot of things, but I would say like the Chick-fil-A you guys were talking about, one of our first edge projects was their advanced lemon processing plant. Basically, lemons go in one end and pulp and lemonade comes out the other side, right? So we went in there, we started off doing, just edge compute and networking for them and helping with it. And then as we went through this, the robotics person, Rockwell, they were having these questions, discovery sessions, and all of a sudden, we're doing application integration and the managed Wi-Fi and communications, 5G, private 5G in the network form to support those things. So edge is a much larger picture than just it's edge. No, that's like saying, oh, it's 5G and it's going to solve all our problems. No, it's what do you do with it that matters and how do you link it into the other things. Then you got to integrate security solutions. So we were asked to do that. And then eventually we did overall project management on it. So the success there is now leading to them considering building 50 more of these factories in the US because of the integration and the value that the edge seemed to give them in their manufacturing. This is a totally no-person plant. It's all done by robotics, and that integration and that speed, that 5 millisecond response I've talked about or less, is critical in those environments to do those types of things. I think one thing you also need to understand is microservices and what that means and what it really is. It's not some It's not some mystic thing. You can get your hands around it and you can understand what it is, and you can define, am I going to do microservices for faster reduces? And then what's that technology stack that you're going to put behind it makes a difference. For instance, one of the things, like I mentioned, polymorphic. We're doing a lot of that. To me, that's the next step in Edge. That's where we're looking at it. We've got partners all over the place. For instance, we're looking at neuromorphic processors. To me, Intel doesn't want to hear this, but FPGAs, they've been there, done that. I'm looking for the next thing in my life. So neuromorphic processors, that basically I can define what goes on that chip, build it, and if I don't need it anymore, I destroy it. It doesn't need to be on the chip anymore. So we get rid of it, and we only build it when we need those things. So you got to think of that as you're going forward. But the 3 key things we talked about earlier, and getting that look of what you want, an understanding Edge for truly what it is, not what you're seeing on somebody's slide set. You need to really delve into it and understand it, have some partners come in and help you, and go through that process of the hybrid process of doing discovery. And then you determine, I'm ready for this, I can build it, or I can have somebody help me. I'll bring in people as I need them. There's a different way to do that. So you've got to do that project planning up front, that PM that you got to do up front.
Okay, that was a lot of wisdom, and I really appreciate that. And I also love the fact that you actually took lemons and made lemonade out of it. That's pretty amazing. I love it.
You should see what I can do with 4 pounds of dirt. So
I don't want to know, I don't think. But thank you for sharing. So let's wrap it up. Max, maybe you can share your final thoughts. We're in our last couple of minutes of this webinar, so would love to hear from you to wrap it up.
Sure. So we are all in agreement that innovation is coming to the edge use cases and edge computing. And the speed to market will be extremely important. So when companies start their journeys towards renovating what they have at the edge, they need to think about changing the development and delivery culture that they have there to maybe resemble similar to what companies currently have in the cloud, and approach it from this digital transformation perspective. Think about agile, think about DevOps, think about microservices, think about continuous delivery. Maybe continuous delivery will not be required for B52, but hopefully for majority of other use cases, they will be relevant. The second thing I wanted to say is, of course, when you start building your edge use cases, you need to think about the platform. It is indeed a chicken and an egg, and you need to figure out how to balance that, but platform is important. You don't want to just build a couple of one-offs that will hold the process and innovation in the long run. And there are all these technologies that we already talked about, the software-defined everything, microservices platforms, Kubernetes, networking, and so on and so forth. It will help. It will help to increase the speed to market, and it will help to increase the speed of innovation. Because ultimately, the power of it is basically to, like cloud, decouple the infrastructure and applications. We need to do a very similar thing with the edge, although maybe they will be a little bit more coupled, but still that is required for a higher speed of innovation. And lastly, of course, you need to figure out a use case to begin with. Otherwise, if you just invest a lot of time and money in the platform and not build any use case on top of that, then you will have questions from your executive team. Why did you spend all that money?
Yeah, great. I love that. Great wrap up, great summary of, I think, some of the key things we heard. I know we're running out of time. I want to first thank our panelists. You guys were amazing. I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope the audience enjoyed it too. This was really fantastic with great advice and great stories. I'm ready to do this again anytime you're up for it. I want to thank Grid Dynamics, who actually sponsored this webinar and brought it to us. So thank you very much for doing that. But most of all, I want to thank you, our audience, for coming to this, sitting and listening and learning. We're going to make sure you get a copy of the recording. You can check back on things that our experts said. You can share it with people you work with or others. And we'll also let you know about our future webinars, which I think based on who you are and why you came will probably be of interest to you. So thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciated you being here. And I'm hoping you have a great rest of your day and that we see you soon on another webinar. Talk to you later. Bye.